All right, so as I start my communication synthesis, I would like to add that there is a lot I have to say about this. I literally just recorded a video and it was well over 40 minutes of me talking about my communication synthesis. So I wanted to redo it and kind of shorten it down. But if I miss anything or if there's any questions, I apologize about that. So quickly, I'm just going to explain how I set up my tree map because it might be a little bit confusing for someone who doesn't know. I broke my communication synthesis up into the 5 different parts of our learning in class. So we did our circle map on our circle up. Sorry, it's getting confusing there. We did a circle map on our circle up, and so this whole page is just that alone, and each branch is a different idea that I saw throughout that circle map. And then I did the congruence here, the paraverbals here, and I have Amy Cuddy's research, and then my personal strengths and weaknesses to talk about. And I think the best thing is that through this entire thing, I've really been able to be more aware of my communication with students, both verbal and nonverbal, and that's been really powerful to see the effects that communication really has in working with students. So to start my Circle Up map, with Circle Up, I saw a lot of different ideas come across in our circle map. So the biggest thing is that I felt like almost everything could be broken up into verbal and nonverbal. That's, I mean, essentially what communication is. You're talking both with verbally with your mouth and with your movements. But in our Circle Up, there was a lot of separate things that were directly suggestions or like good or bad things that you should do as far as like with your voice, and then there was suggestions that you should do non-verbally. The biggest thing with this was that with both your voice and your movements is to always be genuine, because as soon as you walk in, those kids are going to start reading you, and that's important that you're really true to who you are. So that students can trust you, because they're going to know. And if they can tell that you're just not being true to yourself at all, then they're going to see no reason to follow you or model you. With verbal, some things that I wrote down from our map that I thought were really key to my learning and really will benefit anyone in a classroom is that I'm actually going to start at the bottom here. Just some suggestions that were said with like verbal warnings. Like you can always give that student that verbal warning. It's quick and to the point, but making sure that your voice is serious when you give that warning and that they know you're not messing around. Staying enthused, they're obviously going to hear that. Being encouraging, if they hear you being encouraging, they'll start to encourage their classmates more. And that's kind of just building that whole community so that all students can feel included. But also remaining calm in tone or even in voice. Don't ever sound like you're anxious or freaking out or angry. They try to hide those things and keep a very, what's the word I'm thinking of? Not modest, but basically just like an even tone of voice so that students focus more on what you're saying and not on how you're saying it, because sometimes how you say things might not really benefit the student as they learn things. You might be yelling at a student who never knew any different. So it's kind of an important thing. But the biggest thing with verbal is that I think you verbally build relationships with students. And those relationships I've learned are really key, because if you haven't made connections or built relationships with students, you're never going to get anywhere with those students. So first and foremost, I think it's important that you take the time to get to know each student and to really make those connections with them. For nonverbal, I wrote down a few things too, and a lot of these are pretty similar, like keeping a calm and collected, just staying calm and collected with your movements, because if the students are trusting you, they're following you, and if you want your classroom to be a more calm setting, then you have to model that with your movements. Also, that you think about your proximity, your distance to and from, and the space between you and the student, or even where you're standing in the classroom. Is it a danger spot? Like, is your back to the students? Are you allowing them to do things? Or are you talking to a student across the classroom? Because then they're obviously not going to be listening to you with all of their senses. They're going to just kind of be hearing you out of the back of their mind. The focus isn't actually there if there's a lot going on in between. So proximity is important. And some other things are just like, while you're giving directions, standing in one spot and staying still so that the students can focus on what you're saying and not how you're moving. You can always give warning looks. I think that's an awesome way, because if you have a student talking, or if you're talking, to interrupt and give a verbal warning can be really difficult or very intrusive in the classroom. So if you can, you happen to catch eye contact with that student, just give them a look, and that can be a great way to give a warning. And the other thing is that I've learned is huge is adapting to the student and getting on their level. And I really feel that this is a really important part for students, because when you're standing over them, I feel like you're being like super powerful over them. And while you should be a person in power, you also don't want to be seen as a negative authority figure. You don't want to be seen as someone who is just demanding and telling them what to do. You want to be seen as someone who's coaching them and helping them through. So to get down on their level and just kind of talk through situations with them, I feel like is going to get them a lot further than if you were to just stand over them and tell them. Even if you're saying the same thing, the message is conveyed completely differently because of how the student feels, just based off of your presence by them. And that's something that I've kind of experimented with a little bit with students, is because I was so used to just standing over students, and even like as a waitress, like standing over tables, I noticed tables enjoyed a lot more if I like kneel down and I like get down on one knee and I talk to them, because I'm not so in an intimidating spot. I'm more like in a spot where I feel as though I can be friendly with them, and it's more of a community feel, like we're all in the same spot. Here we are together. Let's work on this and work on it together, whatever it may be. The next part that I have is just ways to prevent behavior issues, things that you can have in a classroom that are going to keep your classroom together and on task, so that students don't have basically the pathways to misbehavior. So the first thing is just having certain things established in your classroom. And this is all back to like procedures and everything such as that, like making personal connections with students. I think if you establish those connections, like I said, building relationships is everything. So establish certain connections with those students and establish those relationships with the students first day. Like, that's what Circle Up's all about, is building relationships between the students, you and the students, and having the students build relationships between each other, because when they're all in it together, then you're all going to be motivating each other to learn, and that will have a really big effect on the students. Having a signal for silence. This is something that can easily be established so that everyone's on the same page. When you see this signal, you know what it means, and that's really powerful, that, they can basically self-regulate themselves once they see that signal. They don't need to be yelled at or told. They can fix it themselves just with a little reminder of, oh, I need to be doing this. So having the signal for silence. Rituals of recognition, and I think this is a really big one that I haven't seen a whole lot of, but when we talked about it, I thought it's actually huge, is having different ways to recognize students and making that a really big part of your classroom, because when students have fun recognizing each other, the more they're going to want to recognize each other. And I think it's really exciting that there's a way that students can have so much fun recognizing each other, and that they would want to recognize each other, that they would constantly be wanting to build each other up, and that would become such a good habit and such a healthy habit in the classroom to build each other up. So just having ways to recognize each other is awesome for filling that resiliency compass, that they can feel recognized and everyone feels a part of the classroom in a positive light too. Students are held accountable. This was something just that I thought kind of, you could kind of put a line here almost a little bit, because students are being held accountable. I thought this kind of just sums up anything you establish. Make sure you're holding those students accountable, and that they know their expectation is up here and not down here. Like, they know that it's up here and they're going to be held to that standard. Because if they're not, then what's the point of even establishing anything? It's not established. Like, in order to have something established, you have to have everything held accountable, both the procedures and the students to those procedures. So you're holding yourself accountable and you're holding the students accountable. So it's a two-way street, I guess, there too, not just students. As far as instruction goes, you can prevent a lot of behavior issues just based off of instruction, because for those students that may not get something, instruction is basically what it comes down to, and they're going to misbehave when they don't understand something, because it's easier than admitting that they don't understand. So providing grade appropriate tasks is important. Knowing where your students are and what they're capable of is key to student success, because if they don't feel that they're capable of something, then they're not going to try. And when they don't want to try, they're obviously, like I just said, they're going to look for other outlets, and they probably won't be positive because they're not on task. Always making sure that, and these two kind of go on one, your instructions are clear and concise, and you're posting the directions. If they're clear and concise, students won't have any questions. They'll know what's going on, and it's straightforward, and it's easy as that. There shouldn't be any people that aren't following directions, because if they're clear, they should know what they're doing, and I think that's pretty self-explanatory there. And then I also enjoy just like the idea of posting in the instructions, because for students that might not have heard something or they missed it for some sort of reason, the ability to look back on the instructions and figure them out on their own rather than having to ask the teacher or a neighbor for help is kind of back to that autonomy needle, where they did it themselves and they can figure things out even if they didn't know at first. So I think posting it is really important. And then we've talked a lot about in class just modeling and how important modeling always is. So just keeping that in mind as you do each activity and each little thing, whether it's a life lesson or if it's a lesson for school as far as like educational standard lesson. So just modeling whatever you do. Circle Up's time is a great time to practice modeling different things. And scaffolding the task, basically giving them the steps they need to succeed so that the students who are afraid of failure have the tools necessary for their success, basically so they don't feel the need to fall off the map. They kind of will be able to find that, hopefully find that intrinsic motivation, because they can see that they can climb this ladder of success on their own and they don't need someone. So the more they're getting it, the more you can kind of, weaken the scaffolding a little bit. And I think that can be really powerful for the students, is kind of start them here and then build them up if they're really struggling. And for those students who don't need as much help right off the bat, you can kind of remove that scaffolding. So having ways to adjust lessons is important. So scaffolding different tasks as needed, I should add. And then behavior, these are all just different things, such as giving second chances and removing the stimulus. having a plan when behavior comes about, behavior issues, simple as the buddy room. So if a student is really not doing well in your class and just can't focus or get it together, send them into a different room and see what effect that might have, whether it be that they're able just to have that second to calm down, or they need that second just away from everything so they can think about their behaviors or think about whatever's going on, and then they can come back with a fresh start, clean slate, whatever it may be. Just having a plan for issues like that is really important. And then the let it go and then sweat the small stuff. This is kind of a balancing act. I think is kind of knowing when it's okay to let it go, but never letting it go too far, because if you let it go too far, then you're going to have things spiral out of control. And so it's really important to always sweat the small stuff and only let it go when you see that it's not going to snowball into something else. So moving on to the next thing would be our congruence. And congruence brings us to Albert Mehrabian. He says that the more congruent you can be, the more students will trust you and consider you a role model for their growth. This is really important as far as elementary and secondary teachers go, because no matter what level they're at, they're always looking to you as a model. And I think especially in a secondary grade level, or even like some middle school levels, it can be really hard to build that trust with students, and enough so that they like want to model you. Because a lot of times you get the kids that think they're too cool for school, and they're kind of set in their ways, and they don't really look for specific role models in school because they kind of just feel like they're being told to do things or this or that, whatever it may be. Not always a good thing. So congruence, finding a congruency in your communication, the way you communicate, can really help those students begin to trust you. He also had Albert Mehrabian also had a model, and it was a pie chart, and it showed that really what you're saying is only, and this kind of breaks apart what congruence is. I can kind of show on a model here. It's basically, congruence is making sure that your words match your voice and your body language. So it's kind of a versus, but then it's also a balance scale, and that's more what I like to look at it as, is a scale, and making sure each one of these are in check to uphold a certain message. I thought that's really important. So back to the model is basically what you're saying, your message that you're conveying is only 7% made up of words. So you could be talking a bunch of nonsense, and that's only 7%. Really, what students are reading is coming from your body language and your paraverbals. Now, your paraverbals are the pitch, tone, and speed that you say something in. So it goes back to not, it's not what you said, but how you said it would be a quote that would kind of summarize paraverbals. So 38% of your message is the paraverbals, and 55% is body language. So really your actions are what count, and students are always watching. They're not just listening. They're literally always watching. You may not think they are, but they're constantly soaking up information, and whatever you do, they're really going to read into that, whether you know it or not. Also, to add on with congruence is just some ways to show, basically congruence can really help you become a leader and someone that they trust and want to model. That's what a leader is. And you want to be a leader for these students, and, you know, be that person that they can really look up to as someone they can be to be successful. Some ways to have that leadership presence is through your voice. You need to be firm and businesslike, and you need to sound credible. You need to sound like you are giving important information, because you are. Whatever you're telling them should be important, so that they want to hear it, because it's something they need to hear. And your body, some ways to show that you're a leader is just by standing straight, holding your head back, but still keeping your chin down and keeping your body still. So they know that this message is important and I need to know this. That's a sign of importance, is that you're standing still. And that's really something that can be hard to do. So this is just a personal picture showing that everything's in balance and that's really what's important. And then I did a red frame on kids take you seriously when you have leadership presence or congruence, which was from the video Leadership Presence, the YouTube video, Kids Take It Seriously. So just keeping that in mind was important. Now for paraverbals, I kind of gave you a mini definition of what it was, and I think the best thing that explains it is not what you said, but how you said it, and the how is really important. So paraverbals is really explaining on the way in which we speak. So your pitch, your tone, and your speed are all really important. If you're high, if your pitch is high, you're going to sound upset or anxious. And if your pitch is low, you're going to sound more serious and in charge and in control. And that's really important for students to hear, because they want to know that someone in charge of them is in control. That kind of gives that safety net, or that feeling of safety when someone is in charge. Takes the weight off of them. The tone. So your goal is to have a positive but like still authoritative tone. Some ways to do this is smiling, and it's funny, but it's true that you can really hear a smile, and it sounds silly because you think a smile is something you just say, but when you're smiling, you actually will say things differently. And I think that's really cool. So if you try a sentence and you say it one way without smiling and then try it again with smiling, you can even personally hear the difference, let alone how a kid might interpret it. So just by smiling is a way to sound more positive and upbeat. And then sitting up straight and also listening, they're all important when it comes to your tone. So practicing and listening is important, and listening to others and just kind of learning from them. And then your speed. Obviously, if you're hurried and you're talking really, really fast, then the listener is going to feel like you are anxious, or you're feeling really rushed for some reason. And so there's not a lot of credibility behind what you're saying, because you don't sound important. You're just getting through it. So what's the point in listening? If you're too slow, it sounds uninteresting. You're not grabbing their attention. They're gonna be bored. Like if I were to say something slow, I would probably forget what I was saying halfway through. It's very dry if you're gonna talk slow. So finding that perfect pace, and it's something kind of in the middle of those two. Where's the balance again, and where will it sound natural, so that the listener really can have that focus and interest while understanding that it's important at the same time. And the biggest thing is to practice your paraverbals, and that's same with the congruence. So first, practice your paraverbals. Get those down, how you say your words, since it's 38% of your congruence. Really practicing how you say things. Sit in a mirror and talk to yourself, or call someone and talk to them, and really dig into how you say things. And then the next step would be, now can you match your body language to what you're saying? And that's really gonna benefit you in the classroom when you're speaking with children. And the other thing is, when you think about paraverbals, how would you want to be spoken to? So what would you want to hear? That's how you should be speaking. So keeping that in mind always. Next, moving on to Amy Cuddy's research. Found her research really interesting, and there was a lot to say about it, but I kind of pulled out the information that I thought most applied to me at this moment. And so starting with the top, just that nonverbals are language. I think that's the number one thing to remember, is that we're speaking language, not just by what we say, but what we do. And because kids are so young and they're learning so much, they're going to be, reading what we do and learning from that too. It's basically how they grow. And so knowing that everything you do, that they'll be basically soaking it in. Students will make judgments about us based off of our body language. So that's kind of the same idea. Students are young and they're impressionable. So whatever we do, they're going to be making judgments. But it's not just about the students too. Like your nonverbals, they're also a language, and Amy Cuddy's made a good point, and I red framed it because I think I so easily just think about my communication as far as like being in the classroom and with students, but it's also with adults and parents too. So getting hired for a job is probably the next stage in my life after my schooling, and going into that interview, it can be very intimidating, and it's easy to make myself small. And I think I'm really guilty of making myself small all the time because I lack such confidence in everything that I will do everything to make myself small. And if someone interviewing me just saw someone trying to make themselves small, I can honestly say that they're gonna see the lack of confidence in me, and no one wants to hire someone that doesn't look confident in what they're doing, because obviously they seem very unsure of themselves, and that's questionable, and you're not going to put the money into someone that's questionable. Same goes for parents, as they don't want someone unconfident or someone not confident teaching their students, so acting very in charge. And that's where Amy Cuddy brought up those power stances and how practicing them can help. And I'll get into that in just a second. But the next thing I had was making ourselves big is a sign of powerfulness. Making ourselves small is showing our lack of confidence. So I kind of talked about how I make myself small, and it's stemming from my lack of confidence. But by making myself big, I can show powerfulness and confidence. And personally, that's something I need to work on. But Amy Cuddy's research, basically, she is all about the fake it until we make it. And I think this is kind of cool because, I've heard over and over that teaching is actually just acting. And the only thing is that I find that this is kind of like, it kind of butts with the being genuine, because it's really hard for me to be myself if I'm not extremely confident, but still have to be that confident person. So it's finding that happy medium, because I really want to fake it till I make it, but I also want to be true to who I am, because I think it's okay for students to see, a little bit, not a lot of, but a little bit of vulnerability, as far as I'm imperfect too, and I don't always know everything, but I can show you how I figure it out or how I get there. And so I think that vulnerability of showing imperfections in myself can be important with students. Not so much imperfections that they're going to take to the wrong people and basically get you fired. No, not at all. But basically something as simple as how I'm pursuing a math endorsement, elementary education with math endorsement. And personally for me, I haven't always been the strongest student, and I don't view myself as a smart kid. I really have to work for it. And for me, math can be really challenging and mind-boggling. But it's also something that I see as a challenge that I want to tackle. And I really find it fun because it's like a puzzle. And the satisfaction I get from solving a problem is so awesome. So something as simple as that, I'm going off into a rabbit hole right now. But something as simple as that, and just knowing that they understand that, I'm not perfect at everything either. I think that's okay. But faking a little bit of confidence until you make it, especially with interviews, I think is extremely important, because obviously we all have questions, but going into interviews, we really need to show that we know what we're talking about. And hopefully we know enough that we can really prove ourselves as successful educators, that we can make a difference in their school in a positive way. the next thing is that, what did I write? Oh, just over and over again. Faking it over and over again, and it'll become a natural thing. So for me, that lack of confidence is there, but Amy Cuddy's research basically shows that if I were to keep practicing being confident over and over and over again, it's eventually going to become so natural that I will be more confident, and I won't have those questions there. And well, I know her research has been a bit shaky. I have noticed a lot of, just through practicums, the faking it till you make it. When I first came to school and I started the first practicums in the middle school, I was terrified. I was basically shaking in my shoes. I was sitting in the back of the classroom. I didn't really talk to a lot of the students. I felt as though the students were almost my same age. Like, we were closer in age than, about as close in age as they were with their siblings. Like, it just felt too similar, and it was really hard to change my perspective on, and my stance on how I was. And over the years and through going through different schools and different practicum situations, I've really been able to view myself differently. And it's taken a lot of faking. I had to, give myself little pep talks, inside my car before I go in there, that, I can be a powerful individual who can handle this, even if I don't truly believe it, but still practicing that so that I can perfect it even better and become more confident. And it gets easier and easier with each time. So I guess that was kind of the big things that I got from Amy Cuddy's research. And so taking that into my future, really seeing what's important would be to, I guess just to keep practicing it even when I'm not confident, and to know that it's going to get easier, especially with the first year of teaching. It's going to be a lot of struggles, but to know that it'll get easier and easier with each time. Moving on to basically a personal communication strengths and weaknesses for myself. I think that, personally, I really struggle about talking about myself, but starting with some of my strengths, I guess, when talking about communication, some things that I am probably better at it than I like to think is that faking it till I make it, because I've been practicing that. I've had to fake it till I make it, because to be myself, I would be, crumbling with fear inside. And obviously it's really hard to walk around and be that vulnerable to people. So, I've really perfected faking it till I make it, because I don't want to show that vulnerability to anyone. The next thing is having good tone when I speak. I personally feel that when I talk, I have a pretty good tone. I'm not too high pitched, but I do notice that there are times where I could work on my pitch. When things do get a bit shaky, I could probably work on being more confident. But I think that comes more and more as I continue and I practice, that I have a more even tone. I'd say I've gotten really good at getting on students' level, because that getting down on their level, I've been practicing that, and I've seen it be so beneficial. And I've actually connected with students that, I didn't think that I'd be able to make connections with in my practicum. And that's been really cool to see, just how simply being more like a coach rather than a powerful instructor has been beneficial. And so I feel like I keep practicing that, and that's been really, really awesome to see, and I've gotten good at that, and I see the importance of that. And then my other strength, I would say that I strive to be authoritative in a way that students respect me rather than fear me. I'm never trying to put the fear in students so they listen to me. I don't want a military style classroom, and I understand that some people may run their classroom that way, but personally for me, I don't think that that's gonna fulfill the why am I blanking on this right now? The compass, the resiliency compass. That's not gonna fill needs for students if you're making them fear you. And so I want to gain students' respect and their trust, but still remain very like authoritative, so that they know that these are the strict foundations, but they're going to help you be successful, and that's reward enough, is them being able to succeed on their own. And basically, for those who have needles twitching, that those are fulfilled. Over to my weaknesses, things that I continue to work on and will have to work on is my lack in confidence. Always have struggled with lack of confidence. It's been something that I know I will continue to struggle with. I question myself, and I'm always trying to reach like a better version of myself. And I think that causes me to feel like I've never reached a goal where I can like stop and look back and be like, I'm good at this, or I'm good at this, because I always see there's improvements to be made. So also like being really critical of myself, I think is hard. So that basically that lack of confidence communicating can be difficult. The way that I portray myself, I make myself small, or that my voice may be unused because I'm afraid to say something, or I say something and I don't sound like I mean it because the confidence isn't behind it. Simple things like that. So I put that I also worry, because that's kind of in the back of my head. I worry that students will see through my fake it. So while I'm faking it till I make it, students are very intuitive, and I feel like they can catch on to that really easily, and that can kind of break classroom management if they're able to do that. So I think that's one worry I have. And moving on, something I know that I'll have to work on. That's kind of just reiterating my body language, as far as I need to work on like power stances and making myself seem like someone who's strong and in charge. Yeah, it kind of all hits home with that one idea, but I'm sure there's many more things I can work on, but I just kind of want to end it there. But I ended it with a red frame that practice with communication. It feels like something that is so natural, but it's really, when you're standing in front of a classroom full of students that are basically there to learn, they're just ready to learn, pick up any information you have. You need to have practiced these skills, because ultimately they're going to make or break that classroom community and environment. And if you don't have that, then I don't think you have the right tools to have a classroom that can be successful. And then you're not only failing the students, but you're failing yourself too. So I think with communication, it all comes back to just practicing your own communication skills over and over again. And always improving them, because as far as teaching goes, we're constantly learning. And so we might always run into something that's maybe we have some certain thing that always works, and you get a student and the same thing might not work with them. So it's important to always be able to go back to the drawing board and rework things, flexible, and just always have an open mind for learning too. Yeah, that's what I've gotten as far as communication goes.